For my final film assignment in my film studies class, I watched Before Midnight by Richard Linklater. This was by far my favorite of this trilogy, and I'm going to get into why in just a second. So, we're going to first start with the plot, in case someone is viewing this who hasn't seen this film yet. It is an independent movie. It can stand alone from the first two, because it is a trilogy. So it's better to watch them in order from sunrise, sunset, then midnight. But if you wanted to, you can just watch this film. You don't have to watch the first two to understand everything in it. So Celine is the main female character. She is a French woman. Then you have Jesse, who is an American man. If you couldn't tell by this picture, they eventually fall in love. They really fall in love in the first film, but you see their relationship and how far it has grown in the latest film, Before Midnight. So they fall in love, and they have to make a lot of decisions. They decide in the first few movies whether Celine should get off the train with a stranger who asked her, and she ends up doing it, which sounds insane, but it's very true. Then you have decisions of where they want to live, if they want to get married, if they want to keep communicating. They end up kind of cutting each other off unintentionally at the end of the first movie, and in the second one, they reunite. And we see the love reunite, and it sparks again. And then this third film, you have their family coming together, and they're not really in the honeymoon stage anymore. Honeymoon stage is a term that I've heard a lot around here, and it's where you first get in a relationship and then everything is perfect, nothing can go wrong. And then later, after you get out of the honeymoon phase, you start to argue more and you start to see flaws in each other. So they, after all these years, are out of the honeymoon phase. They travel a lot. They travel to France, and in this film they travel to Greece, which I'll also get more into that later. The film does take place in Greece. And they also have a lot more responsibility. They have kids, and they have to make decisions because they're a lot older now. They have to decide what they want to do with their career, where they want to live, and subjects like that. So I'm going to get into a little more about the Before trilogy. So Before Sunrise, we have them meeting in general. They get to know each other briefly, and then they depart. And Before Sunset, you have the reunion, and then they think of future plans. Instead of, like the first movie, just not seeing each other for 10 years, they decide, hey, I love you, let's stay in contact this time. And then we get to Before Midnight, which the first one doesn't really have the happiest ending, but it's more subtle. It's a little sad because these two people who are in love, they're leaving each other. But then you have a happy ending in Before Sunset where they are together. And then in Before Midnight, this is a lot farther into the future. They have a lot of arguments. This whole film just seems like they're arguing the whole time. But they end up having a, spoiler alert, a happy ever after. After all these arguments, and only a few times where they rekindle what they had in the past with a romance and how they fell in love with each other in the first place. This film also spans several years. The first one, Before Sunrise, was released in 1995, and the latest one was released in 2013, and it follows their life. So Richard Linklater did this on purpose. He wanted to show the progression of years of what happens in a relationship. You have it starting in 1995 with that honeymoon phase I was talking about, and then some years later they reunite, and then some years later with the same actors. He uses the same actors in this trilogy the whole entire time. This makes it feel so much more authentic than getting some other characters. The movie would not feel the same at all. So the last one, Before Midnight, was published in 2013. So now a little more of Before Midnight, since this is the film that I have to focus on for this assignment, and it's my favorite one. It is in Greece. We see at the 30 minutes and 12 seconds mark why they're in Greece. So Jesse is a book writer, and he wrote several novels on his life and what happened with him and Celine. Even though he didn't really get her permission to, he did, and that's also a reason we see in film number 2 of how they got to reunite with each other. So Jesse was invited with Celine, his wife, and his 2 kids to come to Greece and just hang out with these people, share ideas with each other, talk about how they became authors in that process. So his book is the main part of the whole plot. The kids are introduced at 8 minutes and 20 seconds when Jesse has dropped his son off at the airport, and the twin girls are in the car, and we see that they have kids now, which was really, really great. It was a surprise because at the end of the last film, they didn't have kids, but since it's years later, we could see these twins in the family. So, like I said a while ago, he dropped his son off. His son is going to Colorado. We see this at 3 minutes 10 seconds. His son is going back to his ex-wife, or his baby mama, I guess you could say. Going back there, and he is very, very sad. Jesse's more sad than Henry, it seems like, because he's dropping his kid off. He loves his kid. He thinks so highly of his kid, but he's not allowed to, like, live with his kid. They can, but that is a huge decision for Celine that she's not ready to make. We see a brief moment when they're getting along around the 1 hour 5 minute mark. They're rekindling the romance that they had when Jesse asked Celine to get off the train in a spontaneous action, even though they didn't know each other. So they got along, thinking about happy memories of the girls, their kids, and when life was slowing down and normal. Then we get into the arguing part, and they argue about romance and appreciation. Selena's arguing that she does everything and gets no appreciation, and Jesse doesn't believe that, and he's kind of being a little misogynistic, saying like all women do this. But my favorite part was that 1 hour and 25 minutes, when Celine asked Jesse, "Do you even know the name of the pediatrician?" And Jesse goes, "Don't start this," when good and well he had no idea. So, not to be on the women's side, but the father of his twin girls didn't even know their pediatrician, which is something that they should know. And in the ending, around 1 hour 35 minutes, we have Celine saying twice that she doesn't love Jesse, but it has a happily ever after. Jesse tries to have that childish romance again, and Celine's not having it, but eventually she starts to play along after Jesse having some serious talk with her, and it's a happy ending. But enough about the plot overview. This is how it relates to the other before trilogies. There's 2 main characters, Celine and Jesse, and it follows them through several years. It shows the same characters for many purposes. It's a creative choice that Linklater chooses to make it seem way more authentic, and I love this. You have a lot of sex, which is a part of the romance aspect, because these films are a lot about romance and how realistic it is. I'll get to that in a second. But around 1 hour and 10 minute mark, Celine takes off her clothes and exposes herself for a long time in the film, which was, for some people, it can be really hard to watch, and for others, they know how much of a creative choice that is to have exposure in a film, because that really is realistic. A wife would do that with a husband. And then Celine gets a call, and all that romance and sex stops. But this is also a theme in the other films, because like the very first film, they have sex in the middle of the night on a random lawn, and they have it again in the second film, and that just reoccurs. Now, fantasy versus reality. This happens so much throughout the novel, but especially at 1 hour and 41 minutes. They are talking about how the fantasy that they have when they were younger about getting off the train with a stranger, that's a fantasy, which they got really lucky and they turned that into reality. But now that they're older, they have kids, their bodies don't look as nice, they're insecure, they're worried about cheating, they're worried about where they're going to live, they argue about that. that is realistic. People do that. And they want to live back in that fantasy, which they know they can't anymore. It's really hard for Celine to see this at first, but Jesse finally ends up getting to her and says that they're not going to have a fantasy, it's reality, and they have to make the most of it, and that he loves her. And for the last little tick, I put romance because, again, all of this falls under the romance category, which is in every single one of the films. So, Linklater's specialties. The camera rolling. This part I find so fascinating. The camera is continuous. It can roll for 10 minutes at a time, so that means that the actors have to memorize about 10 minutes of dialogue and keep rolling and not have any breaks, any pauses, because say they're at the 9-minute mark and they mess up, they have to restart it because there's no cuts, there's no pans, there's none of that. It films them walking or riding in a train or bus, and the background is moving smoothly. There's no cuts in it. So you don't see the actors messing up. It's like a genuine conversation between these two people focusing on each other. And you can see this at 49 minutes to 1 hour and 4 minutes. How they're just walking to their hotel and to their dinner, and they're passing by people, they're passing by scenes, and it doesn't jump or cut. It does this in the other films too. I remember in the first one, they're on a bus, and you can see the background of the bus just continuously moving, and they don't mess up their dialogue. I love that. It's so fascinating because I believe that takes a lot of skill and talent, and you don't see that in other films. Or you can, but it's really, really rare for other people to have that in their other films because it's such a hard thing to do. So this is something that Linklater does. However, in Before Midnight, they have about another 10-minute walk through, the camera's rolling, not stopping, and then you might get a little pan to their feet or a pan to the grass, which we haven't really seen in the other films, but I like how he switched it up a little bit for this last one. Now the lighting. In his past works with other films, he always has this natural lighting. He does in this one too. There's an example at 1 hour and 37 minutes where they have this lighting as they're in a dinner outside. And there's this lighting on the back of them, these little rope lights you see, but you can still see their faces clearly even though it's midnight or it's late at night, because hence the title, this happens before midnight. And you see a lot of natural light through these special bulbs they have, but they have some sort of light on them to see, which you don't really see in other films, like in Boyhood, when the main characters were in the back of a car and it was pitch black with no spotlights on them to see them, because that's how others would see them. If we were there with them in that car, then we wouldn't be able to see them. It would be black. So we had this realistic aspect that Linklater likes to use. And now the music. Linklater chooses certain music for each of his films. For School of Rock, of course, we're going to have some rock and roll music. For this one, we have classic piano because there's an American and a French woman who fall in love and have to deal with the roughness, reality, fantasy of life that they have. So we have classical piano music due to the romance, and it's very, very subtle. An example of this is 1 hour and 35 minutes when we see the process of them confronting and trying to feel the love again. They're just pausing to take in the moment. And you hear this piano music as they're really trying to think about what just happened. And then they have piano music throughout other parts of the film, which just sets the tone for it. It says that this film is going to be a nice romance, that it's going to be very relaxing, not rock and roll. So some more themes and meaning and tone of this film. It's a really idealistic romance. What might be versus what is. They keep thinking, what would happen if this happened? If we were at this age, would you still stop and ask me to get off this train with you spontaneously? That is the question that Celine does ask. 41 minutes and 43 seconds around that time. They're at a dinner with everybody else from Greece and other book writers and authors. And the other people are talking about everyone divorces is going to come. They say that they love their partner now, but they're going to get a divorce because everyone divorces. And that really frightens them because Celine and Jesse, they know about this. They know that people divorce all the time, but they have hope for each other because they're in love. But then you have all these people, all their peers saying that everyone's going to get a divorce and it's bound to come. That's heartbreaking, and it's really hurtful to hear, and it's depressing for them. And again, at 1 hour and 29 minutes, idealistic mom does everything. Not what might be versus what is. That is what it is. The mom does everything. And it's hard for the men to understand this, and it's hard for the women to admit this sometimes. But this is a part of what might be. What would happen if Jesse took over and did more stuff with the girls. I do say that Celine drops them off and Jesse picks them up, but they really need to focus on the what is. What does happen? That happens right now. Not what if Jesse learned the name of the pediatrician. And then again, another theme is human connection. You don't see any instances, really, of them being on their phones besides, an occasional phone call, or for Celine, a phone call that ruins the night. They are connecting in Greece. They're going away to Greece to meet with these other authors and people who have money to talk about why they're authors and what happens in their books and just their lives in general. You have pure human connection of them walking for minutes at a time, just discussing back and forth all of these random topics that they could think of. They are really connecting. Even though they're arguing, they're having that time. Sometimes it's one-on-one. It's mainly one-on-one. But they're having that connection with each other to find out if they truly love each other. And we see that through romance, as that is a big part. But it's really idealistic and real romance, not the fantasy stuff that people want but might not get. So overall, I really, really like this film. It was one of my favorites that we watched in this class so far. And Linklater, as my final remarks, because this is my final assignment, at first I was very iffy about him. I wasn't sure how I liked him as a creative person, as a film director, because I love School of Rock, but some of the other films weren't for me. It really took me analyzing different parts, like the camera work and the plot and all these different meanings, to really help me understand Linklater and appreciate him as a director.